You will want to be able to distinguish between two types of memory retrieval, and these are recall and recognition. I like to use game shows when I think about these. I like to think about game shows as much as I can already, but they're really helpful in understanding not just what recall and recognition are, but also the differences between them. So for recall, I like to use Jeopardy, because Jeopardy is a perfect example of recall. Recall is when you're asked to retrieve a memory with very few external cues. In other words, somebody asks you for a memory, like the answer to a question, and they just expect you to pull it out of your memory to recall it. Well, there's some interesting things that happen with recall, one of which is that sometimes we know the answer to something, but we just can't spit it out, and it drives us crazy. We actually call it the same thing that everybody else does, the tip of the tongue phenomenon. It's a difficulty in recall when you feel as if you know an answer, you just have a hard time bringing it into your conscious awareness. It's very frustrating. Actually, the tip for defeating this is to stop thinking about it, and research suggests that even when you're not consciously trying to remember it, your brain still works away at finding that information, and that's why several hours later, all of a sudden, the answer will just come to you out of nowhere, and it's really irritating. But that's the tip of the tongue phenomenon. Another characteristic associated with recall is the serial position effect, and this has to do with information that's given to us and what specific information we remember. So I'm a big American Idol freak. I love that show, and what I've always loved about that show is that people either want to go first or last, but they don't want to go in the middle, and that's because on some level we're all aware of this. When you are given a list of information, we're more likely to remember the first part due to the primacy effect, and we're more likely to remember the last part due to the recency effect. Both the primacy and the recency effect fall under the umbrella of this serial position effect, which simply says that information in the middle is what we have a hard time recalling. So if you know that when you're studying, then you might want to go back and look at the middle section, because the same thing can happen when you're reading. You might start out reading very carefully, and then you flip some pages, and then you get to the end and you remember, but that middle section might be a little sketchy. So serial position effect when we have trouble remembering the middle section of information. Well, recall is one type of memory retrieval, but recognition is another. Recognition is when information is shown to you and all you have to do is recognize it or pick it out from a list. Recall questions on tests usually are essays, short answers, and students don't usually like those. Recognition questions on tests are multiple choice, and students sometimes like those much better because they'll recognize the answer. Well, sometimes recognition can be easier. Sometimes, however, it's actually trickier. And it has to do with something called distractors, and these are the false answers, the false choices. I use the example of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire for recognition, because sometimes you think you know the answer, and then you look at the options and you go, ugh. If they're really similar, sometimes you can talk yourself out of the correct answer, even though it's right in front of your face. So that can be a problem with recognition. Another problem with recognition is that sometimes we actually have false positives. In other words, we think we recognize something that we've never seen before. People will do this with each other sometimes and say, wow, I know that person from somewhere, and you probably don't. It's just this trick your memory is playing on you. There's a lot about the way you perceive information, how it goes into your memory that we think explains that. But long story short, a false positive can occur. This is a problem in trials when someone is an eyewitness. A lot of you watch some of those shows like I do. I'll watch CSI, Law and Order. I'll go old school, Father Dowling Mysteries, if you know what that is. But you spend a whole hour trying to answer the question, or trying to solve this crime. And at the end of the hour, you find an eyewitness, and we all go, whew, case closed, because that person remembers it. But what you'll find is that our memories are not as perfect as we think they are. Sometimes we'll hear things or we'll be distracted by information that can get mixed up with the correct answer, and then we will indeed have a false positive. There's a researcher called Dr. Elizabeth Loftus who's done a lot of work with our memory and how not so perfect it can be from time to time. So make sure you know the difference between recall and recognition, and also make sure you know all of those general characteristics about both of those.